And welcome to another episode of Excruciating Minutia, a podcast where we will obsess about sports, pop culture, politics, and other unimportant things, but mostly sports. I'm Randy, and I'm joined again by my friend Steven. Steven, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Getting ready for the big NFL divisional playoff weekend. One of my favorite weekends of the year.
Yep, as we get a little bit more into focus with who will be playing in the Super Bowl, and I get another chance to make some pretty bad picks, though we'll get into that later. Before we get into actually picking the games this weekend and talking about them, there's been a lot of news this week, lots of head coaches being hired. We had talked about a week and a half ago about the NFL coaching openings that were in place, and most of those have actually now been filled. We're just waiting on a couple of last teams. Shockingly, Cincinnati is one of these teams. I'm stunned. You never could have gotten any money from me on that because, Cincinnati's always ahead of the curve, right? When it comes to everything they do.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it to you when we were talking the other day that there's no doubt in my mind that Cincinnati will be probably the last team that hires a coach so that they can lowball the remaining candidates, because they are a notoriously cheap organization when it comes to paying their coaches. They rarely will fire a coach prior to the end of their contract because they don't want to pay two coaches at the same time.
Heaven forbid.
Steadfastly. Yeah, heaven forbid. Exactly. And typically they are the lowest, whoever is their head coach, it tends to be one of the lowest paid coaches. So that doesn't surprise me. You mentioned that there was a second team. That team that has not filled the position is Miami. And Miami, as I did a little research today, and it appears that they have interviewed 4 candidates, but all 4 of those candidates are still coaching in the playoffs, which is a good sign. At least they're picking guys who are on good teams, and they can't hire them until the teams are eliminated from the playoffs. So they've been linked with Brian Flores, who is the Patriots defensive coordinator. Eric, sleeping with Bieniemy.
That's where I was going with that one.
Chiefs offensive coordinator, Dennis Allen, who's the Saints defensive coordinator, and Chris Richard, who is the Cowboys defensive coordinator. All of them, 3 of them have no head coaching experience. Dennis Allen was a head coach, right? Wasn't he the Minnesota head coach a few years ago?
I feel like Dennis Allen has had a chance to be a head coach. My feeling is that it was not for a lengthy period of time.
Oh, I take it back. He coached the Raiders.
Oh, well, does that even count? That he coached the Raiders. He
coached the Raiders for 2 years, 2012 through 2014.
He was 8-28 as a head coach, and again, though, it was with the Raiders. I don't feel like that should be held against him.
Hugh Jackson's jeal's of that winning percentage.
Hugh Jackson wishes he could be 8-28. Yes, exactly. He was actually 2 seasons and change. He was fired in 2014 after starting 0-4. That was on the heels of 2 4-12 seasons. But if I remember correctly, those were some pretty bad Raider teams. They didn't have a lot of draft picks. Terrell Pryor, I believe, was the quarterback of the 2013 team. Matt McGloin quarterbacked some for that team. I mean, that wasn't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was not exactly a good roster. So, you can't really hold that against him. And he's only 46. So he's still relatively young, which is not the case with every single one of these coaches in a league where youth amongst head coaching, it seems to be the current flavor du jour, trying to find your next McVay, your next young offensive-minded genius. I find it ironic or interesting or whatever you would call it to see that we've actually saw some more, at least one veteran guy get hired in Bruce Arians in Tampa Bay, which surprised me a little bit. He's apparently completely opposite a Dirk Koetter in terms of personality and approach, and he was very successful in Arizona, but what is he, 66, I believe Arians is?
66 or 67, yeah.
So it's not exactly a guy that you're expecting to be there for a long period of time. Now, I will note that he brought along Todd Bowles with him, recently let go by the Jets. And I'm wondering, Bowles had lots of loyalty to Arians, had been with him previously in Arizona. That's what helped get him the Jets job. I'm wondering if Bowles, as the defensive coordinator there, it might be a case of Arians coaching for a little while and then turning the reins over if he's successful in turning the team around. That Bowles might be the coach in waiting potentially. That if Tampa might not be looking, of course, I'd be giving Tampa credit for looking with a long-term future, and that isn't always the case with a lot of NFL franchises. But maybe that's what's going on in Tampa. We'll have to see.
That's possible. And the other thing I'll bring up, you talk about Arians being one of the veterans, another guy who's been a coach for a long time, not a head coach ever, but a coordinator in multiple different locations. Unfortunately for you, your Chicago Bears are losing their defensive coordinator who was hired. Vic Fangio was hired by Denver yesterday, I believe.
Yeah. And I was actually, I'm of mixed emotions about that. I'm obviously for him, I'm happy, from a personal standpoint, as a Bears fan, for his personal success and getting an opportunity to coach, he certainly deserves it. There was that part of me that was hoping, well, he's kind of up there in years himself, and maybe that will keep other teams from wanting him at this point because he's not the hot new young thing, and we can hold on to him. There's that selfish part of you as a fan that doesn't want to see him leave, but yeah, Denver did bring him on, and that's somewhat disappointing as a Bears fan, just because their defense is so good, and he's such an integral part to it. So we'll see if that's going to affect the Bear defense next season, years to come. How they're going to move on from this. That's Gary Kubiak, I believe, was the offensive coordinator hire there, correct, in Denver to go with him?
That is correct. Yep.
That seems to be a very good combination. A very good defensive mind running the team as the head coach, but you have somebody in Kubiak who I don't necessarily think is head coach material, but has been a very solid coordinator in years past. It's actually a good hiring by Elway, I think, on both accounts. So
yeah, interesting thing as I'm looking at his resume, his career history, his first pro gig he was a defensive coach for the Philadelphia Baltimore Stars of the old USFL, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was that not
Jim Mora?
Where Jim Mora?
Yep.
Right. And then he went with Jim Mora to New Orleans, and he was part of he was the linebackers coach during the Dome Patrol era, which they had unbelievable linebackers back in the day. That was Ricky Jackson and
Sam Mills wasn't Mills?
Sam Mills, right? Yes. Yep. Exactly. So, he's had some good, he was a defense coordinator for the Panthers when they first came into the league. And they if you remember, wasn't it in year 2, they made it to the NFC Championship game. He started with the Texans as a defensive coordinator. He was with the Ravens. He's been a lot of places. And the one thing that we've seen is wherever he goes, the defense gets a lot better very quickly.
And Denver has so many good defensive pieces, and has had, some of their recent success had been built off of their defense. So this apparently a hire that they're looking to help revitalize that end of the football. And again, we'll see what Kubiak can do. They still have Case Keenum at quarterback. Their running back situation, Lindsey looked really good, but is he still going to be this productive? Was this kind of a fluky year from him? Is he really going to be this good for them? They had traded Demaryius Thomas away, obviously, but they have some young receivers there, Cortland Sutton among them. See what Kubiak can do with some of this young talent, and see if he can make Case Keenum more like the quarterback we saw in Minnesota and less like the one we saw in Denver. The former coach in Denver was Vance Joseph, who was canned, and he's apparently one of the candidates in Cincinnati to be the last man standing, though there's been a report today from Adam Schefter that the Bengals are looking to hire quarterback coach of the Rams, Zach Taylor, as their next head coach. And Taylor would be another one of these young guys. He's 35. So, there'd be, how old is Andy Dalton at this point? I mean, would he have a quarterback that would be his age, basically. He'd be head coaching if he was the one to get the job there. I mean, Dalton's not a young guy anymore. Well, Dalton's 31, so he'd have a quarterback who'd only be 4 years younger than he is if he ends up being the Bengals' new coach. So we'll wait and see. That seems like too much of a progressive move by the Bengals, because that would seem to put them like on the curve of cutting edge in the NFL, and that just isn't the way Cincinnati is run. So, if you're Zach Taylor, do you want the Bengals job? It's so hard, I'm guessing, for so many of these guys to not say yes when a job is offered to you, because who knows if you're going to get that offer again, right? I mean, if you're a guy like Zach Taylor, you're only 35. You're in a great situation in LA with the Rams. You're with a winner. You're with a head coach that isn't going anywhere, right? I mean, McVay will, if McVay ends up leaving the Rams, getting fired because of some reason, if the team were to suddenly go south, well, if you're Taylor, you're going too, right?
That's correct.
So, but do you have enough confidence to say, well, I'm on a target list right now, but once everybody gets hired, will I be part of the coaching carousel, so to speak, next season? And I guess it may be difficult, if you look even at a bad job and say, well, it's a job and it's an opportunity to put something on my resume and maybe make something successful out of it. You mentioned here Mike McCarthy is a veteran head coach. Here's a guy with a Super Bowl. We assumed he would be hired on one of these jobs, and there's a legitimate chance he may be unemployed going into next season. Correct?
Unless he's not being linked to any of the remaining head coaching jobs, he would have to take a coordinator's job. And I think, after being a head coach for so long, I think that might be difficult. You talked about, the guy from the Rams being linked to Cincinnati. One of the things maybe that determines whether or not he's the guy is how far the Rams go in the playoffs. If they go all the way and win the Super Bowl, what does he really have to do anymore? He's not going to improve his status any more than where he'll be at that point.
He could always take a coordinator's job, like an offensive coordinator somewhere. But if you're going to do that, then and leave the Rams to go to another team to be a coordinator, then why would you just not leave to be the head coach at that point? That, I think, becomes the question. So,
Yep. You were also mentioning that he was so close in age to Andy Dalton. That kind of leads us into Green Bay, where Matt LaFleur, who is the offensive coordinator for the Titans, has just been signed. He was actually the first piece to kind of fall into place. Green Bay was kind of the first team to hire somebody. He's only 3 years older than Aaron Rodgers. So there is a very close age gap there.
We're seeing more of that.
Yep, and he has a nice resume, not so much from Tennessee, but prior to that, the year before, he was he's known as kind of as a quarterback guru. He was the offensive coordinator for the Rams in 2017, which was Goff's breakout season. He was the offensive coordinator in Atlanta in 2016, which was Matt Ryan's MVP season. And he was the Redskins quarterbacks coach in 2012, which was RG3's Rookie of the Year campaign. So he has a record of being very successful with quarterbacks, young ones, but we'll see what he does with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I'm not sure he'll be teaching Rodgers anything. Rodgers may be teaching him a few things, depending how that relationship goes. Yeah, it's an interesting hire. It wasn't somebody I necessarily would have put on the radar for Green Bay, but yeah, like you said, he's had a little bit of success, certainly with some good offenses there and some good quarterbacks. We'll have to wait and see. As a Bears fan, of course, I hope it goes terribly wrong and that nothing is successful out of that new hire in Green Bay, but we'll have to wait and see. Going back to Green Bay, going back to McCarthy, one place that he had been linked to, we had talked about, was Cleveland, who ended up going with Freddie Kitchens, who had been their offensive coordinator after Hugh Jackson was fired. And we had discussed this briefly before we went on air with this broadcast, that I thought that one reason, or something I'd heard, that Cleveland was very tentative to hire someone like McCarthy or any veteran coach because Kitchens had done such a good job with the offense and specifically with the growth of Mayfield in the second half of the season that they didn't want to jeopardize that by bringing in someone like McCarthy, who likely would have gone with his own offensive coordinator if he wouldn't have been calling the plays himself. So I think Cleveland ended up going with Kitchens to kind of keep some continuity with the success they had in the second half of the season. And that's actually very understandable because Cleveland really had something very good going on, and you really don't want to mess that up if you're Cleveland. I don't know if Kitchens is going to be the right guy, but it definitely was an interesting direction for them to go in to kind of just keep some stability by keeping him, even though he wasn't the head coach. Obviously, it was Greg Williams, who you mentioned went 5-3 and making him like one of the most successful Cleveland coaches of the last whatever number of years.
Number 3 on their all-time list. By the way, in case you're wondering, last in that list at a 0.83 winning percentage, excuse me. None other than our buddy Hugh Jackson.
Poor Hugh. But yeah, that was an interesting move by them, but it makes sense. Some of these other moves, I'm not sure make as much sense. We were talking, well, we can talk about the Jets going with Adam Gase, who had left Miami, and I was very surprised to see that he was landing on his feet so quickly because he had gone to Miami and they really were very mediocre during his time there. And Ryan Tannehill, he was supposed to help bring along and take the next step. And Tannehill never really did that. Injuries had something to do with that probably as well. But that Miami was just very much a disappointment, I feel like, in the bigger scheme of things, which I guess means that he'd be a perfect fit with the Jets if that's the direction the Jets have gone in, right? Sam Darnold apparently is happy with the hire, and I guess that's a good thing. If you're a Jet fan, you want him to be on the same page. But I mean, what's your thoughts on Gase? I thought that was a little surprising, was it not?
It was. I had heard actually Mike McCarthy was kind of the guy that was rumored there. You know, apparently he likes teams that have green as their primary color. He wouldn't have to change his wardrobe that much. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to hear that it was Adam Gase. You know, Gase did not have a whole lot of success. Wasn't he the offensive coordinator in Denver when Josh McDaniels was there? I don't remember that going too well.
He was the offensive coordinator in Denver in 2013 and 2014, actually under John Fox. So that actually,
was John Fox.
This was yes, okay. And this was during when Peyton Manning was putting up those monster numbers. He went over with Fox to be the Bears offensive coordinator when and it was only one season he had with the Bears. The Bears finished 18th in total offense. And then that got him the hire with Miami. So, you know, he was 23-25 as Miami's head coach, 3 seasons, 10-6 that first year. They made the wild card, then 6-10, but that was last season where they lost Tannehill, and that was he got the experience of living with Jay Cutler again, right? In 2017. And last season they were 7-9, but they were in a position to make the playoffs, and then they kind of fell apart towards the end of the season. Did they not this past year? And it just very not a guy that I just would have looked at and said, "Oh, I can't wait till he's available." You know, if he's leaving and he's no longer in Miami, we've got to get that guy. He just doesn't strike me as that. And he just never struck me as big a deal as he was supposed to be when he first went to Miami. Like the bloom definitely came off the rose with him. Yeah, they lost their last 3 games. They were in a position where they were in playoff contention. What did I say? They went 7-9 this year. They were 7-6, wrapped up the season being blown out in Minnesota by 24 points. who missed the playoffs, and then losing at home against Jacksonville, a team that pretty much had mailed it in by that point, and then losing to Buffalo by 25 points in the season finale in Buffalo. And the Jets looked at that and said, that's our guy.
Well, he does have a nice coaching pedigree. As I'm going back and looking at his resume, he actually got his start at Michigan State as an undergraduate assistant to none other than Nick Saban, and followed him to LSU when Saban moved from Michigan State to LSU, and
then he went to hell.
He worked for
then after he left LSU, he went to hell, didn't he?
Well, he went to the Detroit Lions under Rod Marinelli and Mike Martz, and then he went to San Francisco, and he went to Denver, and he in addition he was there when McDaniels was the coach.
Oh, he was just a different coach. He wasn't the coordinator.
He was a different coach. He was a quarterback's coach, and then he became the offensive coordinator when he left. He was the offensive coordinator for the Bears in 2015. Do you remember that going well as a Bears fan?
I remember the Bear offense being decent, but not anything spectacular. So
they were 18th in total offense that year.
I like I said, the one thing he has over McCarthy is he's young. He's only 40. And I'm always a firm believer, and that's with players or with coaches or with anything else, is that you can't make snap judgments or snap decisions on people at young ages to say that this is who they are and this is who they're going to be. The most famous recent case that we could talk about as far as, coaches who started with not the greatest record to begin with, but ended up being pretty successful. There's a guy who's currently a head coach who started with a 5-year stretch where he went 36-44 with his team. He had one winning season where his team went 11-5, did not win a division, won one playoff game, 2 7-9 seasons, a 6-10, and a 5-11 season. That's not a guy you want to hire as a head coach, right? That guy can't coach. He's clearly probably no better than a coordinator, right? Would you like to take a wild guess who that is? You already know where I'm going with that.
I think that sounds like Bill Belichick.
That is Bill Belichick, who in his time with New England, of course, has 2 seasons that his team didn't win 10 games. And one of them was his first season. So he turned out okay. And Belichick was a young hire. I mean, Belichick's 66 today, or not today, but this year. So when he got hired in Cleveland, that was in 91. So Belichick was actually started his career 91. He was 39 with that head coaching job. He was born in 52. So Gase is still young. So maybe there's growth there. Maybe there's upside there where, again, you look at someone like McCarthy and maybe they wanted the younger guy to go with their younger quarterback, thinking that that's the guy who can be here a long time. Because everyone is looking, we say everyone's looking for their McVay, but everyone's looking for their Belichick, aren't they? They're not just looking for the young guy who's like the shiny new toy. They want the young guy that they can look up 20 years later and say, he's been our head coach this entire time, and all we've done is win. That's what you're looking to emulate. And, so it's kind of, you're looking for the best of both worlds in that particular case. And a guy like McCarthy, I guess, maybe didn't fit that narrative. You have a guy like McCarthy. How many years are you looking at him coaching? How much of a long-term building block do you think he is as a head coach? Maybe that's working against him. Though again, I did not think McCarthy was that old. Is he? Am I misremembering his age here? I feel like we talked about this on a previous.
We talked about that. He's 55. I think we said 56. He was a few years older than me. Not that that's much. Right. I was shocked. I thought he was actually younger than me.
Yeah, and it's one of those we like I said, we saw Arians hired by Tampa. He's 55. Yep. So, but we saw Arians who's older than that hired by Tampa. So it's it's just interesting. It's different philosophies with these teams, different ideas, and we'll have to wait and see how any of these turn out. We could see some brilliant hires here. We could see some terrible hires. One interesting thing that we'll be talking about in the upcoming months is the Arizona coaching hire, that Cliff Kingsbury from Texas Tech coached Pat Mahomes, has that on his resume, and as you pointed out, he stated a few months ago that he thought Kyler Murray should be your number one draft pick in the upcoming draft. Well, who's got the first pick in the upcoming draft this year in the NFL? Is that Arizona?
I believe that is your Cardinals of Arizona.
Interesting. Did they make the leap of faith? Did they take Murray? Do they tell Josh Rosen, I hope you rented? I hope you didn't put a large deposit down on a house here in the Phoenix surrounding area. And Rosen didn't look great, so
he didn't. The one thing I'll say about that is Cliff Kingsbury is the only person outside of Kyler Murray's mother who thinks he should be drafted number one overall. So, just because Cliff feels that way doesn't mean that they're going to go that route.
And I can't believe they would give up on Rosen 1 year in. I mean, Rosen didn't look great, but he had some flashes, and the whole team was bad. That's not really like he could have done much about that.
It was, but and I really thought that the reason they brought in Kingsbury was because he was the guy who had coached Pat Mahomes in college. That they brought him in to work
with Rosen,
with their young quarterback.
Yeah, we'll see how that pans out. It certainly would be interesting to see if he can, make Rosen work. But like I said, Rosen, the whole Arizona team was a dumpster fire last year, so it wasn't all on the shoulders of Rosen. And we watched, as fantasy football owners, owning a couple of Cardinals, unfortunately, in a couple different leagues, in Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson. We got an opportunity to watch some Arizona games, which was about as excruciating as the title of our podcast is excruciating, right? I mean, it was brutal, but it wasn't all on Josh Rosen. I mean, Rosen didn't look good. Let's make no mistake about it. But too early to write him off at this point. So I'm not thinking that's going to be what Arizona will do, but you just never know what a new coach will do, because this isn't his quarterback in there, right? Coaches like their guys, and this is definitely not his guy. It's the previous regime's guy. So we'll wait and see how that works out.
And Kingsbury is coming off of being fired by Texas Tech. So it's not like he's necessarily coming in on a high. He's not like leaving a college program after leading them to, a huge bowl victory or something like that.
This is true.
The minute Mahomes left, Texas Tech kind of went downhill.
Funny how that worked, huh?
Yeah, the question is who's responsible for Pat Mahomes being really good? Was it Cliff Kingsbury coaching him up, or was it just Mahomes' talent?
I suspect it may be the latter. I'm just going to say I suspect that.
It may.
One last note on the coaching, and since we had mentioned Belichick, I don't think we're ever going to get really an answer to that question, which is, I mean, if you talk about great coaches in NFL history, Belichick's name is going to be listed amongst the all-time greats. If you talk about the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, Tom Brady's name is going to be mentioned in that circle of all-time greats. Did Belichick help make Brady? His system, his team, his offenses, his everything he's put around him. Did Brady make Belichick? I think they made each other. I think it's a symbiotic relationship where the two of them together, the sum is greater than the parts would be individually. But at the same time, I don't think we're ever going to find out, because I have a feeling that when Tom Brady decides to hang it up, that probably may be when Belichick decides to hang it up, because Belichick is not getting any younger, obviously. If Brady plays another couple years like he wants to, that may coincide with one another. So we'll never find out that question. Is it because of this? Is it because of one, or is it because of the other, or is it because of both? They're kind of linked at this point. But when it comes to Kingsbury and Mahomes, I have a feeling that maybe this might be more Mahomes than the coach. But we'll find out if Josh Rosen looks great all of a sudden, right?
Yep. Yep. The one thing I will say about the Belichick thing is that Belichick is known as a defensive coach, and he's always been kind of focused on the defensive side. So, he's had offensive coordinators, whether it was Charlie Weiss was there as his offensive coordinator for a long time, and then it was McDaniels, and his ascent really is exactly when the Brady ascent was. I give more credit to Brady than I do to Belichick in that particular
equation
sense. I do. But like you said, very unlikely that there will be any way to actually determine that. I don't think that Brady is going to retire prior to Belichick leaving, and I don't think Belichick's going to, same conversely, that if Belichick left, I think Brady would be done. So, and they're both really getting close to the end as far as, age is concerned, and we'll see.
If you're a New England Patriots fan, you have to look at the success you've had, and it's just one of those things. You have to realize it's going to be coming to an end more likely than not, because you're going to see some major change. But wow, what a run it's been from 2001 up until this past season. The Pats have won the AFC East in all but 2 of those seasons. That's an unbelievable mark. And one of those was the year Brady was that they still went 11-5, but missed the playoffs in the year that Brady went down in the first game of the season, which maybe goes a long way towards also saying, hey, Belichick can coach. He did win 11 games with Matt Cassell at quarterback, right? But yeah, that's an amazing stretch of excellence. And it's one we haven't seen in the NFL very often.
It is
amazing,
and it could have been better. They should have beaten the Giants both years, and if they had beaten them that one year, they would have been 19-0 undefeated, and we could have made the 72 Dolphins
go
shut
away.
The hell up.
Yes,
finally go away. And let's be honest, they got beat last year by some stupid trick play, against a backup quarterback in a complete, there was no chance. I gave Philadelphia no chance to win that game last year. They honestly should have won all 3 of those Super Bowls. They really should have.
And that if they
were the better team, they just didn't win.
They've got 5 rings already, but they're that close, like you said, from having 8 championships over a period of a little less than 20 years. And that's unbelievable dominance. That's especially in this
never
day
been
and
seen before in the NFL.
You did see it. If you did see it, it was pre-salary cap and fewer teams and a whole different brand of football and a whole different setup in the NFL than what you have now. So much harder to win now consistently from a year-to-year basis than it was back then.
It was, but I mean, the one comparison you can make is maybe Green Bay in the 50s and 60s, but even then it was a 10-year stretch. This is 20 years almost. This is the length of time of their dominance is unprecedented in the sport. Same coach, same quarterback, and the amount of winning. Maybe Pittsburgh won 4, but again, it was a 10-year period, right?
And not just the NFL. Think of any sport. I mean, the only thing comparable that you could come up with would be the Yankees in Major League Baseball in various points in their team's history, their storied history, where they were dominating, winning World Series after World Series and going to the World Series every year. And again, that sport was different in a different era, pre-free agency, 16 teams total in the majors. I mean, it was a lot different then. Nothing really like it in basketball other than the Celtics back in the Bill Russell days. But again, none of those were 20-year stretches. The Yankees kind of were, but they were different. But they were different in that the players changed and the managers changed. I guess you could say the Patriot players have definitely changed over this period of time, though Brady has been the one consistent.
The closest is probably the Yankees from the late 40s to the mid 60s. So that's like almost a 20-year period. But they had different, there was the Joe DiMaggio era, and then there was the Mickey Mantle era. So those were the two. It wasn't like one player was there the whole time. So it's similar, but not the same. But and the one thing I will say is the Yankees won far more titles. But it was easier. You won your division. You played in the World Series. There was no playoffs essentially, right? You went right to the World Series.
You won the league. You won the league, and you were in the World Series. The Celtic teams that I mentioned, or the NBA kind of the standard bearer for long-term success. The first championship that Red Auerbach won was in 56-57. And Bob Cousy was actually your MVP that year. Bill Russell was the MVP the following year, where they lost in the NBA Finals. And then they proceeded to rattle off a whopping 8 in a row. So they had 9 out of 10 lost in the playoffs the year following, and then won 2 more championships, in the last one being 68-69. So that's 4, 6, 10, was that 11 out of 13?
11 out of 13, that's correct. And Bill Russell was part of all of them, right?
He was part of almost all of those. I think he was part of that 68-69 team. Yes, he was. He was part of the 68-69 team. But actually, he was the head coach of that.
Yeah, right. Right. He was player coach. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, player coach.
But again, it was such a different, it was such a different league. It was fewer teams and fewer rounds of the playoffs, and it's almost comparing apples and oranges to the setup today with the way things are today in the NBA with the way they were then. Same thing with Major League Baseball, same thing with the NFL, which makes what the Patriots have done that much more remarkable over such a lengthy period of time. But again, the two consistents, Belichick and Brady. So for all of these teams on this list, I guess the main thing is you've got the coach. That seems to be the two most important facets to building a long-term winner. And this isn't any surprise to anybody. You have a great coach, you have a great quarterback. That wins you half the battle at least. A couple of these teams have that quarterback. Green Bay's got Rodgers. Cleveland looks like Mayfield. Some of these teams may have a guy that fits the bill. We'll see with Darnold and the Jets. We'll see with Rosen.
Miami doesn't.
The jury is out, no pun intended, with Winston in Tampa Bay. Denver, Case Keenum is not going to be is no Peyton Manning, and
he's not the long-term solution anyway.
And Andy Dalton is a nice guy and a Sharpie dresser, but he's not a Super Bowl winning quarterback, and also getting up there in age and not a long-term solution. So for all of these teams, even if they're finding the right coach, the question will be whether or not they can find the right quarterback to pair up with them, because that's really where your success comes from. So
one final thought on that. Tampa Bay does have a decision to make, because are they going to extend Jameis Winston's contract? And that'll be interesting. That'll be the first interesting decision probably that we see, because they'll have to make that decision prior to the draft. And if they jettison him, they'll be in the market for a new quarterback. They have to be drafting pretty high near the top, since they had a god-awful season. But we'll see.
One last finish, since you brought up Winston. Apparently today, as of our taping this, Bruce Arians was asked about Winston, and no jokes intended here. The question was, I guess, what do you think about Winston? And Arians' comment was, he needs to be, quote, a little bit smarter, end quote. I'm just going to leave that right there. I'm not sure if he meant that. If he meant that I'm sure he meant that from a game standpoint, though, based on some of Winston's off the field notorious exploits. Perhaps we could apply that on a broader spectrum. He says there's no pressure whatsoever about his expectations for his new quarterback. I just want him to relax and play the game. Talent is no issue. It's just becoming a little smarter. Well, he did make it clear, apparently, during his press conference, he came out of retirement for the right quarterback situation. But he didn't get the Browns job, so that may not have been the most ideal situation, but that he must feel comfortable enough. So maybe that's an early indication that they're going to hold on to Winston. I mean, I doubt he would have come right out and said, oh, yeah, we're going to be looking for a new quarterback. This guy's not the answer. That wouldn't be the diplomatic thing to do, particularly if that quarterback that you'd be looking for isn't on your roster currently, right? But yeah, I maybe that's some indication that he's going to try to work with him and see what they can do. Winston certainly has talent. Question is,
he does.
There have been lots of quarterbacks with talent, or lots of players in general with talent, who just don't make it for one reason or the other, and this is going to be a big season for them.
They do. I just looked. They have the 5th overall pick, and your teams that are 1st through 4th probably aren't going to be drafting a quarterback unless Arizona takes Kyler Murray. San Francisco has Garoppolo. The Jets just got Darnold. I don't think the Raiders are going to move on from Carr yet. I feel like that's not going to happen. And the Buccaneers have the 5th pick, so they could, someone like Dwayne Haskins, who has, declared for the draft, the kid out of Ohio State. That's a potential. That would be an easy, draft the guy, and that's our guy. But I don't know what Bruce Arians feels about him, and I have no idea. Maybe he views that they have other needs.
Defense.
We'll see.
They need defense. They didn't play much of it last year.
Yeah, you have some good offenses in that division. You better be able to shut them down if you want to win. They're not going to outscore those offenses. No.
And speaking of some of those offenses that they would need to be able to stop in order to win games, at least one of them is going to be in action this week. So let's move on to those NFL divisional playoff game matchups and some picks.
Yes.
Let's start it off. I assume that these lines you've sent me, and these are in order of these games being played over the weekend.
You got it. Yep. That's the Indy game is the 4:30 Eastern time game.
So we have a chance to see if Andy Reid can continue his playoff problems with the Chiefs, and with the prior to that with the Eagles. If it's going to be another frustrating year for Andy Reid, or if the Chiefs are going to be able to make this the Super Bowl, that get him the Super Bowl ring that feels like he's desperately in need of at this point to really validate as the last stamp on a very successful coaching career. They, if you remember correctly, played in 2013. Now, obviously, this was not Frank Reich there, though it was a Frank Reich-like comeback. That was the first year for Andy Reid in Kansas City, and they lost that playoff game. That's the one they were leading by the proverbial country mile. I don't know if you remember that game. They lost 45-44, and that was a game that they led. And I'm just double checking to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here. That was the game that they led 31-10 at the half.
Yep, I remember that game.
And the Colts rallied back to win that game in a stunner, is the best way to put it, right? Kind of summarizes the frustrations of Andy Reid in the playoffs over the years, that it ended up going in this direction. In fact, did they score? I think they actually scored a touchdown to start. Was that actually 30? That might have been 38-10, because I think they got the first touchdown in the second half of that game and went up by 28 points and then lost that game in Indy. No, a little bit of past history between these two teams.
That wasn't that long ago either. That was 2013. Yeah.
So Kansas.
Yeah, that's right. They felt it was 38-10. Right.
38-10.
First play, pick six on the first play of the third quarter. Yep. That's
bitter memories
over the next. Yeah, over the next 29 minutes, Luck threw for 314 yards in the second half with touchdowns to Kobe Fleener and T.Y. Hilton. And he also, Donald Brown fumbled. You remember he picked up the fumble and dove into the end zone. Luck did. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
So we get a bit of a rematch many years later. And Kansas City's favored by 5.5. This one is going to be in Kansas City. So no Indy home field advantage here. Line is, like I said, 5.5, and 57 is your over under currently. Steven, who do you have?
I like Kansas City in this game. I think just playing on the road in Kansas City is just going to be a little one bridge too far for Indy. I feel like, their defense is better than Kansas City's, but I feel like Kansas City's offense is just better. I may come to regret this. Maybe Kansas City is not as good as we thought with Kareem Hunt done for the year. We'll have to see. I'm not sure that Damian Williams is not the same guy as Kareem Hunt. But I am still going to stick with, I like Kansas City in the playoffs at home. I know I'm betting against Andy Reid, which basically means you should probably take Indy. And I'm also saying neither of these teams play particularly great defense. Well, actually, Indy does, but Kansas City doesn't. I think this is going to be over 57. So Kansas City minus 5.5 and over 57. I'm taking.
Interesting.
I almost talked myself out of that Kansas City pick as I was explaining my rationale. I may come back to that before we're done here.
Well, I was going to say that I'm actually going to take. You see, okay, this is. I want to bet against Andy Reid. I really do, because I just have seen so many times where Andy Reid coach teams don't manage the clock correctly. There's some bad play calling. Something happens where a better team on paper that Andy Reid's coaching ends up not sealing the deal and loses to a team that's not as good as they are. The difference is I'm not 100% sure that this Colt team isn't as dangerous as Kansas City is in many ways. I think they have a better defense than Kansas City. I think that Kansas City's offense has not been as good since the Kareem Hunt debacle. Now, whether or not that means what that means in the big scheme of things, it's not like they're a terrible offense. It's not like they can't score. They can't put points on the board. And you're exactly correct. Playing in Kansas City is very, very, very difficult. It's a tough place to win. It's a tough place to play. I think back to that Charger victory that we saw in Kansas City as proof that Kansas City can be beaten in Kansas City. They lost to Seattle, did they not? Kansas City did down the stretch. And who is, other than we talked about how hot the Bears were, the Colts, you could make the argument, are the hottest team in the league right now. That's left in the playoffs. Remember, they started 1-5, correct? They were 1-5.
They did.
They won 9 out of their last 6, or 9 out of their last 6, 9 out of their last 10 games. Now, granted, they did lose to Jacksonville. Not exactly an impressive loss. They were shut out, but they shut out Dallas, which has looked good. They beat Tennessee twice. They beat Houston on the road in this stretch. The rest of their wins, not exactly against impressive opponents. They beat Miami. They had beaten Jacksonville previously to that. They beat Oakland in Oakland. They beat Buffalo. They beat the Giants by a point. I'm gonna.
Was that Buffalo with Nathan Peterson?
I might,
or Nathan Peterman. Rather,
it might have been. It might have been.
I think it was.
Buffalo scored 5 points. I'm guessing that probably wasn't Josh Allen at the helm for that game.
Exactly, it was not Josh Allen.
I'm gonna hedge my bets here. I will pick Kansas City to win. I'm gonna pick Indy to cover it. I think it's gonna be a close game. I think it's gonna go down to the wire, and I think we're gonna look up, and I think Indy's going to have a chance to win it. I think Kansas City will do enough to hold on. So I'll go with Kansas City, but I'll go with Indy to cover. And that over under, I'm thinking you're probably correct that it's going to be an over. That Indy's got a better defense, but I think Kansas City will. This has the makings of one of these like 34-31 type finales, where Kansas City does just enough to hang on at home. I still don't feel like Kansas City is going to come out of the AFC, but we'll talk about that more when we get to our next matchup in the AFC that we'll be going with. So
one last piece of information. It is going to be about 30 degrees with snow flurries in Kansas City on Saturday early evening. So again, an indoor team in Indy playing in a
cold environment on the road.
Yeah, snow, 35 degrees, pretty heavy winds. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Then again, I'm not sure that Mahomes has played in that kind of environment, and it is Mahomes' first playoff game, and he still is. I mean, he's second year, but he's really kind of a rookie, right? He didn't really play last year, so
just that one start.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting.
A real quick question: if Kansas City loses this game, I mean, you don't get rid of Andy Reid if you're Kansas City, obviously, but what does that mean for Andy Reid's legacy if you can't win with this team? I mean, they have flaws. They're not a perfect team, and I'm not saying that they need to win the Super Bowl, but if Kansas City were to be one and done again in the playoffs, I don't know how I would feel. I know how bad I feel as a Bears fan going one and done in the playoffs. I got to imagine a Kansas City fan is going to feel apocalyptic if they lose this game at home to the Colts, wouldn't they? If you're a Kansas City fan, you have to be expecting that we're making the AFC title game minimum. And honestly, anything less than a Super Bowl appearance is a huge disappointment for this team. After the way they started, after the way they've played, that's my belief. No,
I agree. I think they have a baked-in excuse with their team. The offense has not been as good. The minute that Kareem Hunt issue came about, and they just haven't been the same since. They can just say, "Well, we would have done better if we had Kareem Hunt, if that didn't all go down." But
the only thing I'll say about that, and we had talked about this prior to the podcast, was it in some ways that would be a little bit of karmic justice because Kansas City knew, and Hunt didn't necessarily tell them the truth about everything that happened, obviously, or at least they determined that. But they knew there was an issue. They could have been in front of the issue. They could have suspended him to start the year for any number of games and done some form of discipline earlier that would have gotten ahead of it rather than be reactionary once the video came out and all that took place. They chose not to. They chose to focus on winning football games. And we've talked about Tyreek Hill is on the team, and he's had his own violence issues. I believe, did he not throw his pregnant girlfriend down the stairs, allegedly?
Yeah. Let's save that for a different podcast. I mean, there's definitely, I feel like there's a whole podcast of
well, we could talk at length about the NFL and their discipline policies and their unwillingness to investigate things. But I felt like, I will say one thing, ever since the Kareem Hunt incident came out, ever since that all came to light, the knowledge that Kansas City knew about it beforehand, and we could talk again about Roger Goodell and his incompetence. That's more than one podcast. But boy, it just felt like, again, like there was something karmic that turned against the team, almost like, yeah, I don't know about them anymore, but I'm still picking them to win this week. That heartbreak may not be till later.
The final thing I'll say about that is when we talk about like the violence in sports and all that, I mentioned to you that to watch the Neil Brennan special on Netflix. Have you done that yet?
Oh, I did. That's on my to-do list though. Yes.
You are instructed that before we do our next podcast, you have to watch that because he actually has an interesting take on the off-field violence among football players. So it's a funny, interesting, and kind of one of those things that makes you nod your head. But we'll discuss that after you watch it. That's for
a later time.
Yes. Okay, onward. The late game on Saturday is your Dallas Cowboys at the Rams of Los Angeles these days, playing in the Coliseum. And the Rams are favored by 7 points. 49.5 is your over-under. Dallas coming off a victory this weekend in the wild card. Your thoughts? You lead off.
I'm going to go with the Rams. I think that they're the better team. Dallas's defense is pretty solid, but they can be scored upon. Their offense is, again, has solid, but I remember we both picked against Dallas last week because we did not believe that Dak Prescott would be able to put up the type of game that they needed for them to win. We also did not like betting against Russell Wilson, though Dallas partially won that game because Seattle they were so committed to the run game. They had opportunities with Russell Wilson to throw the ball and just chose not to, inexplicably at times. The Rams aren't going to do that. Now, the Rams are kind of like Kansas City in a way that they have not looked as impressive over the last third of the season as they had to begin the season. Their offense has looked a little less explosive. The question is, for what reason? Could it really be the loss of Cooper Kupp? Was he that important to that offense? Is that a loss that they just haven't been able to replace? I'm not sure. I think that again, the Rams are not quite the team they were, but I still think they're a better team than Dallas. They're a 7-point favorite. I think it's going to be a closer game than I think Dallas is going to give them a fight, but I think the Rams are going to win. I think Dallas will cover. So I'm going to kind of hedge my bets there.
No, so you're taking Dallas.
I'm taking the Rams.
No,
I'm taking the Rams are going to.
No, that's not what we're doing here. That's not what we're doing here. You're picking against the spread.
I'm making multiple picks here. I'm telling you who's going to win the game.
Do that.
I can do that. It's a free country. I can do that. I have no real money riding on this. See, we talked about this before the podcast. I maintain I was 0-4 last week, and you're trying to tell me no, you picked teams to cover, and I'm like, every team I picked that I actually thought was going to win all lost. I feel like I was 0-4. All
right, so here's what we need to do then. Right now, let's just stick with the picks with the spread. But in the future, what we should do is, if you really think the Rams are going to win, but they're not going to cover, then you take the money line. The money line is you're just picking winners and you're betting odds. Yeah. So maybe that's what we need to do in the future, is just do it by the money line. And maybe next year when we do this, we'll do this. We'll pick games and start with a fake bankroll and see how we would actually do over the course of the year. You may need to go back to the ATM about halfway through the year, but we'll give that a try. So you are taking Dallas +7, but you think...
I think the Rams will win, but I'll take Dallas to cover that spread. Yes.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel better about me picking the Rams -7, that you're taking Dallas.
It should.
I think the Rams struggled when Gurley got hurt. I think we can kind of point to the moment where he was hurt, not a particular moment, but definitely a particular game where it was like from about the last 4 games of the season. Well, he didn't play the last 2 games of the season, but he should be almost 4 weeks between games, which hopefully will have gotten him healthy. The Rams are a run first game, and when Goff is at his best, it's play action. It's playing off the fact that the box gets loaded with defenders, and you got one-on-one coverage on the outside, and that's what they like to do. They're going to be at home. Dallas is coming off of a very physical game last week. The Rams have been well rested. I'm going to take the Rams. I am going to take the under because I don't think this is going to be necessarily a high-scoring game. I think both of these teams really like to run the ball first and not pass, which should grind out the clock a little bit. But I do like the Rams here. I don't like Dallas. I feel like Dallas barely got through last week. They should have beaten Seattle by far more than they did. The fact that they couldn't pull away kind of makes me worried about Dallas in this game. And plus, when was the last time Dallas won 2 games in the same playoffs?
Been a while.
I think we were teenagers.
Probably.
So I'm taking the Rams -7. I'm taking the the under 49.5. Under 49.5. Were you going to take the over or under on that?
I'll go with the under as well. I think we'll see a little bit more defense. I think we'll, like I said, a tighter game. They'll definitely, I think, be on the underside. So, all right. So that's Saturday's matchups. So Sunday we'll be leading off with the Los Angeles Chargers going to Foxborough. Yeah, are going to face the Patriots on the road. We are this close to a LA Super Bowl, and I'm not sure anyone in LA cares that we're this close to an LA Super Bowl, but we could see that legitimately because obviously the Rams, I think clearly have the talent to win the NFC. And I had said weeks ago I thought the Chargers were potentially the team to beat in the AFC. The problem is I'd feel much better if they were headed to Kansas City this week because they've already beaten them on the road. I would feel comfortable that they could win again. They have to go to New England, and New England at home in the Belichick era in the playoffs have basically been close to unbeatable. Have they not? They
have been close to unbeatable.
They lost the last time they lost at home in the playoffs, and this is a team that makes the playoffs every year, was they lost to Baltimore in the AFC Championship game back in the 2012 playoffs. That was January 20th of 2013. So that was literally 6 years ago that they lost a home game in the playoffs. Since then, their only other playoff losses have been on the road. They lost to Denver twice on the road in conference championship games. That was in 2013 and 2015. That bodes badly for the Chargers, except the Chargers win on the road. I thought I saw
7-1 this year.
One of the games that's being counted as, is it being counted as a home game or a road game? They played a game in London, did they not? They did play a London game. That game was, because of course they did. They played.
Did they play the Raiders?
I don't know. I can't find it on the schedule. I'm pretty sure they played. No, Tennessee. They played Tennessee, and that was considered a home game. That was on October 21st. That was week 7, and they beat Tennessee, which is actually a road game that's being counted in their home totals.
So that's 8-1 on the road in all reality. Their one loss was actually at the Rams,
which might as well have been
second week of the season,
which is a game they didn't travel for.
Right.
So
it's a home game, right? That's true.
So I could make the argument that their road loss was a home game and one of their home wins was a road game, because they certainly went a lot further to beat Tennessee than they did to lose to the Rams, right? So
that's true.
So they're very comfortable, and from what I've read, that their team they get behind the idea that they're hearing these fans booing and that everyone's against them, and there's no one rooting for them, because that's what basically their home games have been like, right? They seem to be in the position, and we talked about it earlier, that this seems to be a different Chargers team. This seems to be the team that's going to maybe finally break through. Phillip Rivers, get him into a Super Bowl. But it's so hard. I just cannot pick. I just can't pick against Belichick. I can't pick against Brady. I can't pick against the Patriots at home. The Chargers may have the better team. I just feel like New England's going to find a way to win this game. So I'm going to go with New England. I'm going to go with them to cover. And the over-under is 47. It's not a particularly high line. I'm going to go with the over. I think they'll be able to put up enough points to hold off the Chargers. It's not going to be a super high scoring game, but I can see something like a 28-24 type victory for New England. And And I think like I said, the Chargers may be the better team. I just can't pick against Belichick and Brady at this point in the playoffs. We've been saying it all year that the Patriots don't look like themselves, that they just don't look like what we're used to seeing. We kept waiting for that switch to go on, for us to look up and say, that's the Patriots that we know. And they only won 11 games. The last time they won this few was back in 2009, and they lost in the wild card game to Baltimore that year. So maybe this is the beginning of the end, but it's one of those, I want to see it happen before I'm willing to go out on that limb and pick them to lose. I'm not saying I won't pick them to lose next week, but I'm going to have to ride with the Patriots for one more time.
I feel like the Patriots, looking at their schedule and looking at all their games, they had 5 losses this year.
They did.
They lost at the Jaguars, a terrible team.
Yep.
At the Lions, another terrible team. And those games weren't close either, neither of them. They lost at the Titans badly. They lost by 24 points. And honestly, it wasn't that close. It looked like they lost by 50. They lost at the Dolphins on that crazy last second, miracle play, right?
Yep.
And they lost at the Steelers. So all of their losses are on the road. So they were 3-5 on the road, which means they were 8-0 at home. They had 2 very good wins, 3 very good wins as we look back on it. They beat the Colts, the Chiefs, and the Bears in successive weeks.
That they did.
Since then, they've beaten a Nathan Peterman-led Bills, a Packers team that was not particularly good, a Jets team that wasn't very good.
Twice they beat the Jets.
Twice, yeah. Well, last week of the season, they crushed them. They beat a Vikings team that we mentioned that a couple of podcasts ago about how bad Kirk Cousins was against winning teams. And they beat the Bills.
With Josh Allen twice. That time.
That time was with Josh Allen, but again, they beat the Bills. Since October, they've beaten no one. And they've had some bad losses. And they haven't looked particularly good. I think this is the end. I think this is the end. I feel like this is the year that the Chargers finally, ironically, put it together, the year after they finally leave San Diego. I feel bad for the San Diego fans who put up with all their losing for all those years, and the minute they leave, they may go on a Super Bowl run. I think they're going to win. And I'm picking, and the fact that you're choosing New England makes me feel better about my pick. So I am choosing the Chargers +4. It's interesting in that, as you said, that the Chargers basically are undefeated away from home, and the Patriots are undefeated at home.
Something's got to give, right? Immovable object against the irresistible force.
Thank you. Is that what this is? I'm going with the Chargers. I just don't think New England has not looked like themselves this year. Brady has shown cracks. He started out really well, and then he's just started showing cracks. I feel like they don't have any receivers that they can count on other than Edelman. Gronkowski is. This has to be the end of Gronkowski, right? This is it. And he's still not healthy. Losing Josh Gordon probably didn't help. That's what I'm going with.
I will say, if I'm a Kansas City fan, I'm rooting hard for the Patriots, because you mentioned the Patriots have had struggles on the road. We mentioned how difficult it is to play in Kansas City. We mentioned that, Kansas City obviously would have home field in that playoff game. It doesn't matter who comes there, but the Chargers beat them there already. And if the Chargers beat New England on the road and go into Kansas City, if I'm a Chiefs fan, that is not the team I want to see facing across me. Is the team that already beat me here coming in. The Chargers will be riding high if they can knock the Patriots off on the road. But you would feel like if you're a Chiefs fan, yeah, New England's the division winner, is technically the higher seed. But if they come here, everything you just said, well, the Patriots don't put up points like they used to. Our defense isn't the greatest, but they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. Their defense is a little bit suspect. We should be able to put up a lot of points. We've got the home field. We've got this. I'm not sure you're going to feel like that if you're a Chiefs fan. You see the Chargers, so I think the Chiefs fans will be rooting for New England to pull this one off. And honestly, depending how this all shakes out, that'll determine probably my pick next week. If it ends up a Charger Chief game, I think I'd be going with the Chargers next week. If it ends up New England and Kansas City, I'd probably be picking Kansas City. If it ends up Indy at New England, or it could be Indy at the Chargers, couldn't it? In theory, if both road teams win, well, then I guess all bets go out the window at that point, because I don't think anyone is expecting an Indy Chargers AFC title game. Though, again, it wouldn't really. I think that's the one thing, despite my perceived terrible record I have of picks from last week, as I think I did say at one point during our podcast where we went through our picks, that there was a scenario. I think I said, couldn't you see every underdog winning? Every road team winning? Or it was like, you could have made an argument last week that no game was a slam dunk. And that's kind of what we saw, isn't it? I mean, we saw road teams win in at least
every road team covered. Just so you know, the only road team that lost was Seattle, and Seattle covered by half a point, but they covered.
So it did kind of fall that way. So
one final thing on that game is it is Foxborough in January. Weather could be a potential issue. The current weather forecast at game time is somewhere around 25 degrees, no chance precipitation, so no snow, and light winds and 6 miles an hour is what they're predicting. So
get your hoodie ready.
Yeah, it'll be cold, but it's not going to be, they're not playing, it's not going to have a snow game. It's, we're not going to have Vinatieri kicking a 40-yard field goal in knee-deep snow to win the game here, or Gostkowski or whoever's the kicker there. And that was the Tuck Rule game, was it not? So we're not going to have that, barring some change in the weather. But it is New England. That's always a possibility. But so that is a warm weather team going to a cold weather place and traveling across the country, but it's not an early start. So that's, and like we said, San Diego has not really cared where they play as long as it's not home.
Pretty much. Which leads us into our final game, in which case there will definitely be some home field advantage. That's going to be the Eagles, my favorite team in the entire world. And they'll be facing off against the Saints, of course. I live in Louisiana. I'm not a huge Saints fan. I mean, I root for the Saints when they're not playing the Bears. They would be my secondary team, I guess, if you're allowed to have one of those. I guess they're now the team I will by default be rooting for as a fan, since the Bears are out. They will be at home. They are favored by 8 points. The over-under is 50.5 as of your sending it to me. And I think I made this prediction on the podcast we did right after the day after the Bears lost, where I said I was taking the Saints. I was taking it, and I said I was taking them and the points, because I think the Nick Foles Cinderella story is coming to an end this week, because the Saints are just a better team. This is an Eagles team that needed help to get into the playoffs, is still playing a backup quarterback. Who's still Nick Foles, who's not terrible, but he's no Drew Brees. The Saints have more offensive weapons. The Saints have a far better running game. I think the Saints have a much better defense. I think that the Eagles secondary, the Bears only really exploited it late in the game. The Eagles have some inexperience in their secondary, and the Bears finally did exploit it. I don't think it's going to take 3.5 quarters for the Saints to be able to do that. I think the Saints, they played them already this season, blew them out. The Eagles have had some talk about how, well, we remember that because there I guess was some discussion on whether or not the Saints were running up the score against them in that game. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Maybe there's some revenge. Great. You don't lose by 40 points this time. You just lose maybe by 20. So I'm taking the Saints. I'm taking them to cover. I'm taking the over. I think they're going to put up a good amount of points. I think we're going to see the Rams against the Saints in a rematch in the NFC title game. So that's pretty easy on my end. What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if you saw the report out of New Orleans of what Peyton did to motivate his team. Did you see that?
I did not see that. As local as it would have been, I did miss it.
Okay, so the other day he came into the locker room to address the team. Came in with armed security guards, the Vince Lombardi trophy, and $225 in cash. Put it down on the table. And asked his team, do you want this? And to a man, they're like, yeah, we want that. And he said, then win 3 effing games. That's all you got to do. Motivation. He's like, put it right in front of them. Made them see what they're playing for. The trophy.
And how much cash?
$225,000.
I misheard that. I thought you said he put down $225. I'm like, is that for a hooker afterwards? I'm like, what?
$225,000.
Okay,
large.
That's a lot of hookers.
Large. I may have said that.
That's a lot of hookers.
Yeah. Okay. 225 large.
Not that I would
basically
know.
Said, you want this? Win 3 effing games.
That's a very basic, down to earth motivational speech. That seems like that's something taken right out of a sports movie, doesn't it?
It does. Is that? Are we sure that wasn't Al Pacino in
Any Given Sunday? Was that
Any Given Sunday? Correct.
Yeah. Talking
or
about
was it
inches.
Burt Reynolds in The Longest Yard? I'm not sure. It was one of those.
Other sports, is it Gene Hackman and Hoosiers measuring the rim at the gym in Indianapolis?
It's kind of that. It's it's definitely not Gene Hackman in The Replacements.
No,
the football movie, but I agree with you, which scares me. You mentioned how bad the Eagles secondary is, and they are literally down to like their 7th and 8th cornerbacks at this time. They've been decimated with injuries in their secondary. And I have a feeling that when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback like Drew Brees and arguably the league's top receiver in Michael Thomas, among other guys, they're going to win that game. Now, the one caveat is that if Peyton, as you like to say, gets too cute and starts using Taysom Hill too much in wrong kinds of situations,
or we look up and it's like, why hasn't Alvin Kamara touched the ball for like the last 3 series, or weird things?
Correct.
Right?
Correct. It's kind of, that great start that Alvin Kamara got off to, right? He finished the season with only 883 yards. They really went away from him towards the end of the season. And I think they need to get back to that. I think they need to establish the run a little bit at the beginning and to like soften up the defense and then just start throwing the ball. Because I don't think there's any chance in hell, unless you are right about what you said about Nick Foles and that he has sold his soul to the devil, and it doesn't matter what the Saints do, that, the devil is going to guarantee, it's ironic. It's the devil versus the Saints, right?
Yeah, that is true.
So, but I just think, the Eagles literally have been in playoff mode now for 4 straight weeks. They had to win all their last 3 games. They had to win them all and against some very tough competition. I just think this is one bridge too far. I think the Saints are much better team. They're well rested. They basically they should be 100% healthy, right?
They should be.
They barely played their starters in their final game of the season. They had a week off, and now they're going to come in fresh. And, that the Eagles played a very physical game against the Bears and that kind of thing. There tends to be a lot of upsets in the wild card round, but once you get into divisional play, the likelihood of finding upsets is very, very rare. So I'm going with New Orleans. I think they're going to score a lot of points. The Eagles may score a little bit at the end trying to play catch up. So I'm going with the over of 50.5. I hope I'm right because I really don't want to see. I work very close to Philly. There's a lot of Philly fans, and they will just be miserable to be around if they win this game after winning the Super Bowl last year. Because honestly, if they win this game, I don't think there's any stopping them. I think you are 100% right that Nick Foles has sold his soul to the devil. I don't know when that payment is required, and if it's not required till after the season, then they're not gonna get beat.
I just will say I look at the Saints and look at the Eagles and name a skill position other than tight end where you really feel that the Eagles would have an advantage. I mean, Ertz is better than anything the Saints run out at tight end. So he's the big weapon for them. Running game?
Maybe defensive line?
Maybe.
And it's close.
Yeah. Not the secondary, not the quarterback, not the running backs, not even necessarily maybe depth at wide receiver. That they have Golden Tate, they have Alshon Jeffrey, they have Aguilar. I mean, they have more depth, but even the best of those guys, Michael Thomas is a better receiver than any one of those three. I just feel like the Saints have more weapons on both sides of the ball, and the game is in New Orleans.
Oh, that's a rough place to play in the playoffs. So
it's a rough place.
That crowd is going to be fired up.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a difficult place. So all of these things, I can't find anything other than supernatural, diabolical forces at work, possibly bringing Philly to a win here. Again, even if Sean Payton got cute, and again, if we looked up, it's like, well, why aren't the Saints were running the ball effectively? Why haven't we seen Ingram? Why haven't we seen Kamara? Why did they try that goofy play? Even if he does that, I think that just makes the game closer. But it's like trying to add up an equation. I can't figure out a way to make anything crunch where I'd be like, oh yeah, this is how Philly wins this game, other than there's bigger forces at work here. And then if that's the case, then, I'd say the same thing. If they end up winning and assume, let's say the Rams won, they'd have to go play the Rams on the road. I'd be saying the same thing next week. The Rams have them beat any which way of Sunday. But then again, I never would have expected them to be defending Super Bowl champions to begin with. So we'll wait and see.
And Philadelphia beat the Rams on the road 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So they know they can do that. They've already been there. They don't know that they can go in and beat the Saints because 4 weeks prior to that they got smoked by the Saints, 48-7.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the theological implications of this game if the Eagles win. I'm not really sure. I'd be kind of scared because, like I said, that would make me question some things that are going on. But, like I said, these aren't my Bears. I think I said that last week. I was very worried. I picked the Bears, but I did pick the Eagles to cover. I thought it was going to be close. I picked the Bears with a lot of trepidation. I was very concerned because I was very worried. I'm like, they're going to lose. What was I telling you before? I'm like, God, I just feel like they're going to lose this game. I just don't feel that way. If the Saints lose on Sunday, I may not say a word during the following podcast. I may be in shock. I literally might be in some form of shock that renders me incapable of speech. That's how strongly I feel about the Saints. So anyone who does hear this before the game, if you are in an area that does allow legal gambling, I advise you heavily, go see your bookmaker of choice and get some money down because as you said, that's usually a recipe for going the other direction, right?
And if you think that Philadelphia is going to win outright, that with an 8-point
or the Saints
margin and on Or no, if you think Philly's going to win outright. If you think that, not you, but
Oh yeah.
our
Anyone who's listening.
our one listener, you got to take the money line. The money line should be huge. I can't find it right offhand, but I'm guessing it's probably 280, 300.
At the moment, the Saints are pretty much not everybody's pick, but they are the consensus pick amongst most experts at this point as your Super Bowl favorites. So, I have to imagine, every game this weekend, there would be games that we would say, yeah, that's an upset. Like I said, the Chargers beating New England on the road technically is an upset, but I don't think any of us would be stunned. Indy beating Kansas City on the road, again, we'd be kind of surprised, but then we'd be like, oh, it's Andy Reid. Dallas beats the Rams on the road. I think that would be a pretty big shocker, but I think, an Eagle victory would be like, wow, I don't care what Nick Foles has done. I never could see that coming. Just as like I said, I just can't picture it, which means I probably should go find a way to drive to Mississippi and get some money down on that.
But by the way, the money line is anywhere between 300 and 320, depending on the bookmaker. Put down 100, so it's basically a 3-1 odds.
What would be more likely? Financial gain on my end to cover public humiliation at being so wrong at a pick? Would it be the other way around? Would the monetary loss be more painful than being right on the pick? That's the question I have on my end to go with, right? Things for me to ponder until we get till Sunday. So, but I think that's a good place for us to call it, Stephen. So if you want to take us out, I think we'll have some more subjects to talk about in some of our upcoming podcasts. We have Hall of Fame voting for Major League Baseball coming up towards the end of the month in a couple short weeks. Of course, we'll be talking about the aftermath of these playoff games. We'll have the NFL Pro Bowl coming up towards the end of the month, which will take all of about 3 seconds for us to talk about our interests in, and some other various subjects, including some other off-topic, off-sports subjects we can get into. But we'll save that for a later time. But Stephen, if you want to lead us out, I think that's a good enough place to call it.
Sure. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. And if you like what you heard, please recommend us to a friend. You can find us on Twitter at Excruciating Podcast, or you can check us out on our website, excruciatingpodcast.com. There you can find where our podcasts are hosted. You can choose your host of choice and feel free to subscribe and listen in. We'll be back next week discussing our picks and looking forward to the conference championships next weekend. Until then, everyone enjoy your weekend, enjoy the games, and we will catch you on the other side.
See ya.